participants. We will let them in.
I'm not Bobby. I'm Ron.
Glad to have you, Ron.
Hey, Rick. Cousin Greg's here.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for being here.
It's nice to see you too.
Can we please just change everybody's name on the Zoom screen to Rick Lupert to avoid confusion?
Great idea.
On the table so you can see him.
All right. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first ever, perhaps the first of many, Rick Lupert summits, festivals, meetings, also possibly the last. I'm not sure. It's either the first, the last, or something that will happen weekly. We're not sure. We're delighted to have all of you here with us. My name is Rick Lupert.
Why does Rick have all that hair?
My name is Rick Lupert as well.
And I am also Rick Lupert.
Yeah, as you can see, we're both Rick Lupert.
I would like you to meet Rick Lupert.
Yeah, I would like to meet you, my friends, who I can see on the couch. The American Rick Lupert.
Ladies and gentlemen, live from Vienna, the Austrian Rick Lupert. Wait, Austrian? No, Vienna. Yeah, Austria is correct.
Yeah, Vienna is the capital of Austria.
I'm giving away my American lack of knowledge of how geography works, I think.
I'm so sure he's got us.
I'm going to mute all the participants and then ask Rick Lupert to unmute. So that way, that way all the rest of you can continue to talk as you please without disrupting the Rick Lupert festivities. Did I mention that my name is Rick Lupert?
Yeah, mine as well. So I'm glad to meet you live, and we've talked before once, and it was fun, and I'm glad we do this Rick Lupert Summit today, and yeah, let's see how it goes.
We're going to see how it goes, and I don't think anyone will be injured at the very least as part of the process, so I think we're in good shape there. We have a whole plan of things that we're going to do for you. We're going to introduce ourselves in a moment. We're going to talk about how Rick Luperts found each other. Brendan Constantine will be here in a few minutes, and he's going to explain what is a Rick Lupert, which has been a great mystery for people for quite some time. We're going to interview each other. We're going to ask each other questions so Rick Lupert can learn from Rick Lupert about Rick Lupert. We're each going to read some of our work. Rick Lupert has a new novel out and in German, and a section of it has been translated into English at great expense. And we will be hearing that, and I'll be reading a few poems as well. Rick Lupert. And then at the very end, we're going to just throw caution to the wind and see if there are any questions for Rick Lupert from the assembled people here, our friends, our American friends, our Eastern European friends, etc. And we hope that overall that the festivities will be able to be described as ridiculous. So there you go. I worked on that word very hard for quite some time. So I hope it went well. So let's introduce ourselves if we could. And thanks everyone for being here. So Rick Lupert, please introduce yourselves.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Rick Lupert. I'm 22 years old. I live in Vienna, Austria, Europe. I'm a student of comparative literature at the University of Vienna, and I write. I'm a writer, and yeah, I've published my first novel this spring, March 21st, with Verlag Rotscheibe. That's a Bavarian press, and I wouldn't have thought that I'd be able to present it to an English language readers this early, but yeah, I'm glad I'm able to, and I thank you that we do this. Who are you?
The pleasure is mine, Rick. May I call you Rick?
Yeah, you may.
Okay. Well, I'm Rick Lupert, who lives in Southern California, in a suburb of the Los Angeles area called Santa Clarita. I was born on the East Coast in New Jersey, lived there for less than a year, and moved to Fort Lauderdale for a few years, then Syracuse, New York, where my family is actually from. And I know we have some Syracusean adjacent people watching, and I'm happy to have my cousins on hand here. In 1982, I think it was, I moved to Southern California with my mom and to the Pasadena area, and have been here for a long time. I decided I never wanted to move again. It's a lovely place to live. I work as a graphic designer and a website person for people who need me to do that work. I work from home, which is awesome. I write a lot of poetry. I've got a lot of poetry books out. I have a new one coming out soon, I think, called It Spritz O'Clock Somewhere, which is a book of poems I wrote in Italy last summer when my wife Addie and I had the chance to go there. And I write a lot of Jewish poetry too, and am involved with my wife as a Jewish music person. We work at synagogues and schools singing songs about Jewish stuff, and that's me. That's the American Rick Lupert.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So you asked me this before we started, and I think it's a good thing before I hear from Brendan about what is a Rick Lupert, which I think has been in the burning question on people's minds for quite some time. Like how in the world did we come across each other? How did we have such, like, I've always thought I had such a unique name, and there was never another Rick Lupert anywhere, and apparently I was wrong, but I think you found me, right?
Yeah, I was aware of you since I first Googled myself with, I don't know, 11, 12, whenever people start Googling themselves.
It's
And
about the age.
yeah, I found you, and I was surprised to find someone with my name living in America and doing something I always dreamt of doing, writing, and that impressed me and was kind of disconcerting as well, because I was afraid that, I don't know, somewhere in the distant future when I'd be a really successful author, that be much confusion, and I thought about a pen name because of you, and I decided, no, that's ridiculous. And yeah, and then I found you on Instagram last year, I think, and I followed you, and then we started to chat because you also thought that this coincidence was a fun thing to explore.
Yeah, I would. That's. I wasn't aware that there were any other Rick Luperts, and then I noticed that Rick Lupert started following me on Instagram, and I thought, oh no, someone is trying to steal my identity, and what's happening here? And so but then I quickly looked at your profile. And I thought, well, if this person is trying to steal my identity, they're doing a very thorough job because they have a whole online life. And I noticed very quickly that you're a writer. And so I thought, my God, this is an actual other Rick Lupert out there. And I have to be honest, in America, most people think that one Rick Lupert is already too many. You know what I'm saying? So it's, now that there's two, it feels like it was going to cause a problem. But I think that you might have the potential to soften the blow, as it were, for the Rick Lupert community.
Often a blow.
Make it easier, make it more palatable to tolerate the existence of the American Rick Lupert, because there's an alternative.
A European one
Yeah.
for everybody who, I don't know, because Americans, I don't know. I mean, that'll be a question I'll have for you, but if you want, we could go
Well,
to
let's
these
hold off on those
questions,
questions,
or
but because we're coming up on that segment, but yeah, I just so I was really excited that there was another Rick Lupert, and I thought, okay, well, this person looks younger and he's writing. He's probably mad that there's another writer, Rick Lupert, out there, and it's like, oh no, this is going to get confusing. I have my new book coming out, but I figure we can probably just share the profits of all of our books going forward, and it'll make it fair.
yeah, why not? I mean, if you get me an English contract,
I'll sign anything in any language. Just send the papers over. So that's how we came across each other, and we had a secret Rick Lupert meeting a month and a half ago or so to determine how we would go forward in a world with multiple Rick Luperts. And this event, Rick Lupert on Rick Lupert, is the first of, or last again, of many or no more that will possibly happen. So I think the next thing that we're going to do is, as I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there, is on what this all possibly means, is we're going to finally understand what a Rick Lupert is. So let me put up the slide so we can all get excited. There you go. There's the slide. And now that we've seen that, I'm going to ask Brendan Constantine, who's a Southern California poet, to come on, and he's actually a world-renowned expert in Rick Luperts, and so I'm excited to hear his perspective on what is a Rick Lupert. Hello, Brendan.
Hello, and hello, everyone. Well, it's springtime again, and with this season of renewal, many people all over the world are asking those wistful questions that springtime seems meant to inspire. Where do I come from? Where am I going? Is there an afterlife? Is it possible to get into acting through modeling? Can I borrow your toothbrush? And perhaps, first among all, what is a Rick Lupert? Well, Rick Luperts are everywhere and come in all shapes and sizes. Big as an IKEA superstore, tiny as a coupon, and just sort of middle-sized, like a meal made from half a panini sandwich, some leftover hummus, and maybe a Kinder Surprise egg. Most live in cities, but they've also been observed moving amphibiously between ponds and slag heaps. A Rick Lupert's diet is thought to include a variety of arboreal and terrestrial vertebrates, such as orangutan, young sambar deer, barking deer, mouse deer, yes deer, not right now deer, bearded pig, gray leaf monkeys, and porcupine, all of which are prepared in accordance with vegan traditions. Gift soaps and scented candles are sometimes consumed, usually during monsoon, with tomatoes or red peppers, or a simple bonne femme, a white wine sauce with shallots, mushrooms, and lemon juice. None of these should be taken, of course, while operating machinery, driving, or piloting commercial aircraft. Side effects could include audio and visual hallucinations, feelings of euphoria, swelling of the face, and a certain frisson when listening to lists of side effects. If you experience elocutions lasting longer than 6 hours, discontinue use and avoid dictionaries. Remember, it's a crime to drive and Lupert on America's roadways. Please Lupert responsibly.
Thank you, Brendan. What an honor to have you here, to have someone really, I think, explain for the worldwide audience what could possibly be happening here at this time. We both appreciate the effort you put into that. Most of this, I understand, was just previously an oral tradition passed on from one Brendan to the next, and so that you created this piece that can now exist in writing is epic and an extraordinary time to have reached. Thank you.
It's true. The first litany of Lupertism was uttered around a campfire in prehistory, and it is a tradition that's been carried on for millennia until now. It's been my honor to be of service to you all today, and I look forward to the reading.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Brendan Constantine has been our Rick Lupert expert for the day. I can't thank him enough. I know that the research continues and more things will be discovered about what it means, and I look forward to learning more as well. Rick, feel free to reach out to Brendan and for insights that might be useful to you in your very existence.
Thank you. I knew that there would be this segment, but I don't know you, Brendan, and I had no idea what this would be like, and it was great fun. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, and honestly, we do know each other, don't we?
Yeah, obviously.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Forbidden knowledge becoming public, finally. Fabulous. Round of applause, everyone, for Brendan Constantine, for his knowledge, for his time today. Thank you so much, Brendan, for being here. We're going to move on to the next segment in which Rick Lupert interviews Rick Lupert. There's the official slide, so you know it's really happening. I'll let you just look at that for a moment. We spent thousands of dollars on those slides, so we need to leave them up as much as possible. I don't know how that translates. I'm speaking in American. It cost a different amount in euros, and I apologize for defaulting to the American currency when speaking about these things. I'll do better next time if there is a next time. So we have some questions for each other, and which one of us should go first, Rick? Should I ask you a question, or would you like to ask me a question first?
You can start.
Okay. Well, my first question for you is: can we get a concise history of the Vienna Lupert family?
Yeah, I know the 5 questions already, and I found this one the easiest to answer, because it's, I think, a pretty classical Middle European family ancestry, I guess. My mother is from Germany, my father is from Vienna, from Austria, but he is also half German. But his mother is from Bavaria, and my mother is from North Rhine-Westphalia, which are two different places, even though Germany is, compared to the US, such a small country, but Austria is even smaller. And yeah, they met 24 years ago, which skiing in Austria, which is, I think, the greatest cliche they could have come up with. And then my mother moved to Vienna for my father. And yeah, now we're all here, despite my mother's parents who still live in Germany. So I will visit them once a year. And yeah, that's the history of my immediate ancestry. And the further you go back, the more Nazis you'll encounter. So we'll just stop here.
It's always been a dream for the Jewish Luperts to make peace with the German Rick Lupert. So we don't have to delve into that history, and I'm glad we are where we're at today.
Yeah, me too. So my first question to you is, how many Rick Luperts do you know apart from yourself and me? And why isn't your son called Rick? Because I know you have a son, and it would have been such a great opportunity to carry on this tradition.
Sure, it would have been. Well, the first part of your question, for the longest time, as I mentioned earlier, I just thought there was me, the one, and then we learned quickly that there was two, and I don't know of any others, but I suspect there are many more who are just waiting to come out, as it were, as a Rick Lupert, who've been, suppressing their identity, who haven't been brave enough to just declare themselves a Rick Lupert. I see many people in the chat have changed their name to Rick Lupert, so perhaps some of them, perhaps that's happening now. Perhaps we're entering the golden age of Rick Luperts at this moment. And I think they were just waiting to see what we would do. And so I assume that you and I are the chief Rick Luperts, and that they're looking to us for guidance, for inspiration to self-identify as a Rick Lupert, and to see what we'll do next. And we're the beginning of a very long, I assume, chain of Rick Luperts to come along. In terms of why I didn't name my son Rick, there's a long story behind that. The main reason is that it was actually $20 more to name him Rick, and it just, at the time, money was tight, and so we had to go with a less expensive name. Also, I should mention that his name is Jude, which happens to be a German word, and so for Jew, and so in a way it was a tribute to you, without taking away your name. You know what I'm saying? So we're hoping to raise funds to change his name to Rick later, but we'll see. We've got food to buy and rent to pay and such, so I'm not sure it's going to happen so quickly. Perhaps isn't it every parent's dream that their child lives better than they did? We're hoping that he, will have the means to name his children Rick, boys and girls alike. My next question for you is, what is the most Rick Lupertiest thing you've ever done?
I don't know what the most, I won't be able to pronounce that, the most Rick Lupertiest thing I've done is, but I know or as I was thinking today about what I should answer to, what answer I should give to this question, I did a very in character thing for me, which was get a haircut before having a reading. And even though I now realize that it hasn't changed me a bit because my brother was very, very careful, once he started to cut away, my thoughts were, how stupid can you be to do this on a day when people will look at you and you'll be thinking about nothing but how stupid you look, but he did a good job. So yeah,
Wait, hold
my
on a second.
next,
Did you say your brother cuts your hair?
yeah, he 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 did the apprenticeship for hair cutter. How do you say, to become a hairdresser?
Hairdresser. Okay, that's great. I
Yeah,
think that's why you can afford, or your brother at least can afford to name his children Rick Lupert, because he, or and you for yourself, because you don't have to spend money on haircuts. So that's fantastic.
true. My next question to you, how did you come to poetry, or more specifically to writing poetry?
Thank you for asking. I see you've come up with much nicer questions than I came up with, much more thoughtful questions. I The first poem I ever wrote was in third grade, which was a long time ago, and poets came to my school, and I think in DeWitt, New York, as a matter of fact, and they did some poetry workshops with us, and I remember writing a poem, an acrostic poem where you take a word and you take each letter of the word and you write a line that begins with that letter. So I wrote a poem about the animal pig, and so it was a 3-line poem that went, "Pigs are very piggish, irregularly attached to mud. Gosh darn it, pigs are messy." So that was, I think, the first poem that I wrote a very long time ago. I think in the 70s, late 70s maybe, in DeWitt, New York. And I didn't think about poetry for a long time. And I used to carry around a little journal. Well, before I did that, I would have these thoughts, these observations that I thought were humorous or interesting, and I would think them up and then I'd forget them. And I thought, well, if I don't write them down, they're gone forever. So I started carrying around a little journal and writing them down. And sometimes I would just write a little longer in the journals, and I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I didn't think of it as poetry per se, just things I happened to be writing. And so there was an event here in Southern California at a long gone but beloved coffee house called the Iguana Cafe, called the Poetry Circle, which I saw advertised in the local newspaper. And the idea was that you'd go to this event and you'd read a poem, and everyone else would give you feedback, and then after that, the next person would read, etc. And I thought, well, I'll go and I'll read my things, and they'll say, "Oh no, that's not poetry," and then I'll know, and I can try something different. But it turns out when I went to this event, they were very supportive and encouraging of what I'd written, and that led to a consistent involvement with poetry in one way or another since then. I think that was the mid 1990s or something of that nature, possibly before you were born, but I'd like to not think about that too much. And now I run a weekly poetry reading on Zoom. I have a lot of books out, that kind of thing. So that's how I came to poetry. So my question for you, question number 3, is in America, the Rick Luperts here, all of us, we're a big fan of cats. We have 3 cats in our home. The household kind of revolves around them. I'm wondering, do the German Rick Luperts like cats, and or do you have a spirit animal that you might prefer to spend more time with than you do with humans?
Yeah, that's a question that touches on a deep wound inside of me, because when I moved out from my parents, the first thing they did was buy 2 cats, knowing that I'm allergic to cats. And yeah, that's the story. So I'm not particularly fond of them, though I mean, they're cute, I guess, but I can't touch them. So I like dogs more, but yeah.
Well,
My
just
next,
do you
yeah,
have a spirit animal, or like, you know, an
a
animal that you
spirit
really
animal. Would you say
love?
that the cat is your spirit animal?
I'd say so, yeah.
I don't know what my. I mean, I
Do you have a favorite animal? Let me just put it that way.
dinosaurs, any
Oh,
kind of dinosaurs. Yeah, because I'm a 5-year-old boy. Yeah,
sure. That's great. And I hear, you know, with cloning and DNA, they're bringing them back. So soon you'll probably get to, like, you know, have your own.
yeah, which would be great. And even though I know the Spielberg movies, I'd go to the park anyways. It would be an honor to be eaten by a T-Rex. Yeah,
I just want to say before you ask your question, knowing that you're allergic to cats, if I ever have the opportunity to visit you in Austria, I will make sure to do the laundry before I come, so no cat dander comes along with me to
great.
not create
Thank
an
you.
issue.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime. My next question to you is, yeah, is again about your poetry, because I read a bit on your blog, the how is it called? Jewish uh Jewish jewishpoetry.com, right?
.net, yes.
.net. Okay, yeah. And I have questions about this. Can you describe how your poetry is connected to your religion and what you're trying to say with your Jewish poetry? And might your poems serve as a kind of intro to Jewish scripture for secular and non-Jewish people? Because I noticed that um, every poem you post is somehow connected to a verse or to a few words from the scripture.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for reading those poems. It's an honor to have a Rick Lupert's eyes on the work. A lot of what I've been writing, not all my travel poetry, which is not Jewish. I write a lot of non-Jewish poetry, but I find that the Jewish stuff I write resonates in particular with a lot of different people, both Jewish and not Jewish, who are interested in, who struggle with, or who are connected with their own spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs or cultural connection to their, religious way that they grew up. And so, I think that's why I started writing more of that. And I write at least one Jewish poem every week. And every single week, there's a Jewish document called the Torah. It's the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and every week Jews read a section of it, and it's the same section that week every single year, though it doesn't exactly sync up with the secular calendar. It's based on the Hebrew calendar. And we read these same texts every single year, every week. And the challenge is, if we're reading these texts every week, what do they have to do with us? The story of Noah's Ark, a very famous story, which about the animals and the flood. The words don't change when you read it the next year. It's not like one year Noah brings on 2 of every kind of animal, and the next year the text changed. Oh, he's bringing 3 this year. No, it's always the same exact story. So why do you read this same stuff every year? And what are we supposed to learn from it? And that's the challenge, because we, of course, as human beings, change as we progress. We may hold on to our love of dinosaurs as we get older, but other kinds of things change, and the way we read something changes. It's kind of like if you see a movie that you like more than once, or read a book that you a second time, you notice different things in it, or the same thing has a different meaning. And so that's why I keep returning to this text. And though I am very involved with Jewishness, because I work at a synagogue and it, and I have my own sense of spirituality, I like to think of myself like very invested in the culture of it and the traditions of it, but not necessarily the supernatural beliefs of it. I'm not writing that part off, but it's very easy to connect with, well, why are we lighting these candles on this particular day or every Friday? Why? Because your parents did it, and their parents did it, and their parents did it. So you might as well do it, because a lot of people have been doing it and doing a lot of work to make sure that you had the opportunity to do it. So, that's really kind of interesting. Also, there's a lot of good food in Judaism. So, fried potatoes galore. So, in terms of can it be an intro for people to Jewish scripture? Maybe. I think a lot of my poems are writing from my perspective, and they're calling up things from my own life, my own events. Some of them exhibit skepticism about the text and what's being said, and so I don't know. I think you'll get a sense of what's being said in the text, but you're also getting kind of an opinion and a point of view. So I don't know that it's a great general introduction, to the Jewish text, but maybe you're getting a flavor of it, along with definitely some one-sided commentary on it. Thank you for that question. All right. We've got 2 more questions each. My next question for you. I think I'm old enough to be your father. Is it possible that I am your father, or at least your uncle?
I mean, it's possible if you've been to Europe 22 years ago. And well, I was born in September, so around New Year's or Christmas, New Year's 2000 in Düsseldorf, North Rhine-Westphalia, because I'm sure my parents visited my mother's parents around that time and seemed to be very happy and in love. So yeah, if you've been there, and I mean, if you go back to the first slide, there is a slight resemblance, at least how we look into the camera. There is a possibility.
Well, let's just quickly take a look to see if we can see any. Yeah. What a coincidence these 2 photos are.
Yeah.
That they both should exist like this. So you may be right. I don't think I was in Dusseldorf. It was around the time that I met my wife 22 years ago, though I think that was a few months earlier, so the timing doesn't exactly work out. Though I was in the Frankfurt airport once, and that was might have been a couple years later. So we might have to do more testing, I think, to fully determine what the possibilities here.
Yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, at really be interested where the Lupert family split up, because we talked about it, how there could be a relation, but we can't go back far enough to determine that. But yeah, I don't know, or it's just the same name without any relation. No idea.
Yeah, there's a lot of lack of information and people who know anything on the Lupert side of my family to determine exactly what has happened. I know that my father says that the family's from Italy, but I don't really have much more information than that one sentence. And when I did a DNA test a couple of years ago, it came back 99% Ashkenazic Jew and 1% Italian.
Okay.
So I don't
Yeah,
know.
that would. Yeah.
So
I'm
we're
not
definitely
aware
from
of.
Eastern Europe for sure. But Poland on my mom's side, I don't know much about my dad's side, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think my great grandparents came from what was then Poland. No, what was then Germany and what is now Poland, East Prussia. Yeah, but Poland is a large country as well. Okay, it's my turn, right?
It
I
is,
think.
yes.
Yeah. The Europe-America question. How do you think a European Rick Lupert is different from an American one, and what is the most American thing about you?
Yes. Well, we're probably more similar by the very nature of our Rick Lupertness than we realize. I would imagine all Rick Luperts have certain things in common. We're both writers, for example. We both have dark hair. Your brother cuts your hair. I cut my own hair, which it's very similar to having your brother cut your hair, I think. We both, I think, believe deeply in the concept of the Rick Lupert as well. Some differences. The American Rick Lupert is a vegetarian. Are you a vegetarian? No. Yeah. German or Austria. I would imagine you get off the plane and they just hand you sausages. So that's a difference. We've already learned the cat difference. The European Luperts are allergic to cats. Well, not your parents apparently, but what can you do there? The American Rick Lupert writes poetry. The German Rick Lupert writes fiction. The Austrian Rick Lupert. I was going to say I wrote this down based on the picture that I've had of you, but I maybe this isn't true. I don't think I shave as much as you, although I did happen to shave yesterday, and just by coincidence, it looks like you haven't shaved. So
I don't have to shave much because it isn't much to shave yet.
that's a big difference because like if I don't shave every half hour, I turn into a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot. So it's important that shaving happens as much as possible on this end. But again, I work from home, so I can get away with not doing it so much. This is really, I think, speaks to Americans versus everyone else everywhere. But I speak just English, maybe a tiny bit of French, and even less of Hebrew. And you clearly speak English very well, possibly better than me. As well as German, and I think that there's definitely a difference between the amount of languages that Americans, despite taking language in school, that we really get to know, whereas in Europe and in Austria, you're clearly fluent in English and probably other languages as well. And I think the main difference, though, is age, and it's an interesting difference between Europe and America, and kind of the opposite of the way it works. I mean, in Europe, most things are much older than in America. Our oldest buildings in America are a few hundred years old, whereas in Europe and where you live, your oldest things are thousands of years old, and so here in America, the Rick Luperts are actually older than the Austrian Rick Lupert. So it's America. Americans really have had much longer to deal with the shenanigans of Rick Lupert, and they're much quicker to tire of them. Whereas I would imagine the concept of the Rick Lupert in Europe is much more refreshing and interesting, and people and more celebrated. The most American thing about me. Well, I looked up American stereotypes just to see what American things were: obsession with guns, racism, capitalism, materialism, love of the military, obsessions with celebrity, and I'm actually none of those things. So thankfully, I am a big fan of entertainment and pizza as well. I'm a huge fan of pizza. It's my mission to have excellent New York City pizza, which I don't have too close to where I live in Santa Clarita, so it's kind of a problem. But based on most of the American stereotypes that I listed earlier, I realized apparently I'm not very American, I guess. So I'm going to go with pizza, which I also had to look up because there's an argument about whether pizza is actually Italian or sort of more American, but it kind of depends on which sort of pizza you're looking at. And in terms of New York City pizza, that's definitely an American situation. All right, our last round of questions. You've got a new book out, a brand new book. It's your first book, and I'm wondering if you can tell us about it, what it's called, what the concept is of it. And we may have hinted at this earlier, but can you and I share the profits from it?
Yeah, definitely. Especially if there is someday a full English translation and you get me a publishing contract in America, I'm willing to. Okay, so the novel is called Der schlimmste Feind. That's German for the worst enemy. And it takes place on a fictional island, which was colonized by the Austrian Empire. And it subsequently went through the phases of which many colonies go through. First part of the empire, it becomes independent after the First World War because Austria lost most of its lands after the First World War. But this island in my fictional universe was then still led by Europeans. And then the indigenous people of the island tried to free themselves and a resistance developed, which led to a civil war. And the result of that, and in this result, the people live in my novel, is a divided island. In the south, there is a state called Osat, which is populated mostly or predominantly by the indigenous people. And in the north, there is Meerland, which Lara Umodumov, who translated the chapter I'll read today, has translated as Sealand. This state is populated by the descendants of the colonizers. And in the novel, there is again a war raging, but this time only in the south between the forces of a dictator and the resistance. And for the north, for Sealand, the most immediate consequence are refugees who try to flee there, but are also persecuted under the new and current government of Sealand, which turns more autocratic by the day, and they try to not let anybody cross the border. And the novel follows different characters from all over the island, and I think it's definitely a parable on European refugee policy or politics. But I don't know too much about American politics, but with your Mexican-American border, you have similar discussions, and yeah, that's what the novel is about.
Well, it's, you know, it sounds like you could be writing a contemporary, you know, documentation of what's happening in America now to some extent with the great political divide that we have here. And I know when we had our initial secret Rick Lupert meeting a month ago or so, I know we talked about. You told me that, you know, what you're describing in your book and what you see is happening in America is also very similar to what's happening in different countries in Europe, and I was surprised to learn that, because sometimes it feels terrible here, regardless of which side you're on. Just the fact that there's such a struggle to get along and to agree, that it feels like the conversation is no longer civil, you know, and so it sounds like you're documenting what's happening almost anywhere these days in your book, and I'm really excited to hear a section of it in a little bit.
Yeah, I look forward to reading it. And my last question to you is, as you also write travel poetry, what's the funniest thing that's ever happened to you abroad or on the road, and or your strangest traveling experience?
I can think of two funny things that have happened on while traveling. I write, as you know, as you may know, a book almost every year. Addie, my wife, and I, we go on a vacation, and I spend a lot of it writing and kind of documenting the trip. And there's a lot of funny observations, and we just have a great time. But occasionally things don't go as planned. So two little stories. On one trip to Paris, we decided we wanted to visit Versailles, which is a beautiful single-family residence outside of Paris where the king and queen used to live. But we weren't so familiar with the trains system and how to get there, and we didn't book a tour. So I thought I knew how to get there, and so we got on a train, and I realized that the train wasn't going to Versailles, and we didn't know where it was going. And so we just got off at the next stop and realized that we were in the middle of nowhere. There was like a train stop and then fields. We just found ourselves in the middle of France, nowhere near Versailles. You know, much younger in our travels. We were not as experienced traveling. So we crossed the tracks, and we got back on the train and went back to Paris and decided not to risk it anymore because we didn't know where we were. And then the other thing happened a few years ago when we went to Japan. We visited the city of Kyoto, and after visiting we took a train successfully to just the outskirts of town to go to a sake museum and have some sake. And on the way back to the train after the sake museum and drinking sake, we saw a sign that said riverboat tour. And it was in English, and oh great! And we looked at the time, and the tour was leaving in 5 minutes, and it was just a couple minutes walk. And we thought, oh, what a beautiful opportunity to go on this, you know, river tour of wherever we happened to be. We didn't even know where we were, but so we went down, and they spoke English at the ticket booth, and they took our money in English and directed us to the boat. We got on this little boat, and at that point there was no more English. It was a bunch of Japanese people and my wife and I, and the entire tour was in English. So we were going up and down a river, and things were being pointed out and said in Japanese, and we had no idea what was being said. And it was just, or where we were or why we were there. And they let us off at the end of the river to tour like a dam that was there, and the tour meant get off the boat and just look around. And then eventually we got back on the boat, and they brought us back to where we started. So it was just very funny that like the sign in English said boat tour, and they were happy to take our money in English, but then there was no English, so we have no idea where we were or what we did, and what we saw, and if we were even going to come back alive. But we did, and those are a couple of the things I can think of that happened on our travels. Well, Rick, thank you for those questions, and for your answers to the questions that I asked, and for embracing the ridiculousness of it. I appreciate that. And we're going to now move into our next phase of where we get to read our work. Let me show the official slide so people get a sense of the weight of this. There it is. Rick Lupert reads Rick Lupert. Okay, we've seen the slide, so we know it's a real thing. You're going to, I don't know which of us should go first here, but do you want to start and read it, since I just talked for a while, and read the chapter from your book, and then I'll just read a few poems that I have?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can do that. That's the book from which I read. That's the German version, and I had one of the chapters translated, and I practiced before. I read it once, and I realized my English doesn't get better over time, but I hope you'll excuse any pronunciation errors. Yeah. It's a chapter taken from a narrative strand about a family who live in the south. So they're indigenous and they're suffering under this dictatorship. The chapter is about the parents the parents of one of the main characters who will become a refugee. Yeah, and I think the rest is self-explanatory. I'll just read it. I hope you'll enjoy it. The door opens. Barlam and Chanda Trimba enter, closing the door behind them, looking worn out and exhausted. Both of them stand there for just a brief moment, hand in hand, breathing in deeply, looking astonished. They fall into a hug, as if for the first time in a while they had been able to relax their muscles, before they take off their shoes and walk through the dim light of the living room, not letting go of each other's hands, their faces in disbelief, just like every day, because where would they even start looking for the things to believe in? The next morning, if nothing gets in their way, unless everything were suddenly to change, they will head out again, separate halfway, taking different paths. He will take the path of the mines, where he will spend countless hours deep beneath the ground, underneath the sand in the midst of the island's rocks, digging for raw material, whilst she will follow the path of the town hall, where she will be spending her day, typing whatever they tell her, even if she doesn't know who will be the head of this town hall tomorrow, because the power dynamics between the gang leaders change constantly. This, however, doesn't change anything about her position. She's one of those precious creatures who can write in many languages and even know how to handle a computer. Actually, her husband is also capable of doing that, but at the same time, he's one of the few men left who are still physically capable of doing the hard work in the mines. Because the men who are not currently fighting rebels or took their chance to escape are fighting the streets for their leaders, beating each other almost to death, leaving the battlefield with no capacity to work. This means that the other men, the ones that don't go to school anymore and are strong enough to do the mine's work, have to bear the burden, regardless of their other skills, which have been important in another previous life. After they're both done with their shifts, they will meet again, but they won't be going home yet. No, they will be doing what that which they have been scolding Raman for just the week before. They will be risking their family, their and their children's lives, or at least their freedom, by doing that one thing they have been trained to do. They will do what they have been doing before the Civil War destroyed everything. They will be trading books. Although the word trading is too ordinary, the mind connects it to a traditional bookstore and everything cozy and homely that comes to mind when you think of this term, everything that belongs into a normal world, into a normal country. Their current form of trading, however, doesn't have anything in common with the kind they have been practicing since the beginning of the Civil War, or actually since the dictator occupied the government palace in Falmouth. Their trading is not so much a trading as a smuggling, a passing on the quiet, a saving mission, an act of protection, an action that does no longer earn them any money, which is probably the most significant difference to a traditional definition of trading. Even drugs are being traded in a more classy and profitable way, and on top of that, illegally in common countries too. So they will meet, traipse around streets and people, slipping books to long-distance drivers, hide books in raw material shipments, and if they don't have the possibility to get their books out of the country, they will stash them in a safe place where they can be copied so that they can be distributed in the city, hoping that they will be read by people before they will be burned by self-proclaimed policemen or gang members who are loyal to the regime. Earlier, in this other life, in this other time that their youngest son probably cannot even remember anymore, they had for decades been selling books from all around the world, hosting lectures with authors from the Osat, of which none are among the living anymore, and even of texts by Sealand writers on the business premises of their old bookstore, which their oldest son cannot pass without running his fingers tenderly through the dust that has been accumulating on the windows and which they now try to avoid as much as possible. Even when they pass their former store accidentally, they look away. There had been this feeling as if you were living on an island in friendly company, in two states, but barely undistinguishable, until this man, the dictator, who is still ruling today, had been elected and the first clever, foresighted people, to which Barlam and Chanda unfortunately did not belong, left for Sealand. The Civil War started and they still hadn't left. The current government in Sealand started to rule, and at this point they didn't even have the chance to leave anymore, except into a camp in the mountains where there would have been no possibility of escape, and where there also would be no possibility to keep on doing all the things they are currently able to do in resistance against the dictator, which is hardly more than nothing. Before his rule, you could read whatever you wanted to, and even that did not prevent his election. So why should they succeed in taking him down by saving books and spreading leaflets filled with forbidden lines? But they're still trying, which is more than the majority of the city has done, but still less than what the rebels are trying with their weapons. The rebels' efforts are so far away that they can't even influence the anarchic conditions that prevail in Pitlis, which is going down with its own war in the streets. Pitlis is destructing itself, just not enough to disrupt the production and continuous shipments of the raw material to Falmouth, because that is the only guarantee ensuring the dictator's ability to afford the weapons that he needs for defeating the rebels. Although this raw material is being extracted on other sites in the south of the island, Pitlis presents one of the few mining sites that is so deep under the control of Falmouth that the rebels haven't even tried to occupy it. But they don't need to, since they already control enough similar places to afford their own weapons. Now Barlam and Chanda just sit there, alone in the living room, with a blank stare, hand in hand still, sitting tightly together, their faces bare of any thought or even a feeling, until suddenly Barlam gets up and starts tiptoeing to the stove, where he fills 2 plates with stew, taking 2 spoons out of a shelf and bringing everything to a table where Chanda is already waiting for him. Following his slow and hesitant movements with her bloodshot eyes, which cannot stick to him, always drifting away as if she were too drained to even grasp a clear thought, her face unable to express any other feeling than deep exhaustion. Although there should be more. There should be relief, relief to be at home, gratitude for the stew. There should be fear. Fear of someone kicking in their door and discovering what they have been doing in their free time. But her face is blank. It is known that God moves in mysterious ways, but in their presumed omniscience and omniferocity, these ways can be easily guessed. It's the human's thoughts, which in their uncertainty and incompleteness are more cryptic and impenetrable, which no ray of light can illuminate. Thank you. That was translated by Lara Umudumov.
Rick, that was great. It was a great translation. The translator did a really good job with it, with the text. And I know translation is tough because sometimes the same words or concepts don't exactly exist in the language you're translating to, so it's quite a challenge. Your reading was great as
Thank
well. I love the line in there. Even the drugs are being traded in a classier way. It just gives you a sense of how nice this civil war must be for people. And then really the text from beginning to end. You told us earlier what the story is about, and I think in the actual prose that you read, we get a real sense of the whole story and where they are and what's happening. And then you really bring it home with the story of the two individuals just sharing stew, dealing with the situation that they're in. And I've always thought, it's one thing to understand the big events of history, but you really don't understand them until you understand like the stories of the actual people who experience them. So it's a really great glimpse into your book, and congratulations on having it out.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind words and for the opportunity to read something or a translation of it already, which is great. It's weird, but it's great.
It's good weird, I think. All right, well, I'm going to read just a handful of poems. Shouldn't take too long. Some older and newer things. I was thinking about our names. And so the first couple of poems have to do with names. This first one is called "What's in a Name." My parents named me Rick, spelled just that way, R-I-C-K. They liked the way it sounded and didn't want to have Richard on paper just so they could call me Rick. When I ordered my birth certificate in 1986 from the great state of New Jersey so I could get my driver's license, it came with a document signed by my dad removing the K, which he thought would be cool. There's another document attached to that, dated the very next day, signed by my mom, changing it back. You could see the divorce coming for miles. That's that one. Poem number 2. This was a poem written after sort of a famous poem by a woman named Zelda, which is often read at the end of a Jewish service when we say the prayer remembering people who have died, who've passed away, who are remembering. And her poem sounds very similar to this. Each of us has a name. Each of us has a name is repeated. And I wrote a new version of it, also called Each of Us Has a Name. Each of us has a name. You should know what yours is, and if you don't, you may not have been paying attention to your parents. Each of us has a name. It may be Phil or Sarah or Neville or some exotic combination of letters dreamed up in the moments before your birth. Each of us has a name, and it is yours forever. Even if you use the laws to adjust it, the people who knew you first will not adjust with you. Each of us has a name that you can shout from a mountain, and maybe the stars will hear it, or even just one star. Each of us has a name, and like a commandment, you shouldn't take it in vain, or no one will take you seriously. Each of us has a name which sometimes the people who aren't on your side learn first. It burns on their tongues. Each of us has a name which we put on our papers, which we sign in our books, which we use to say, look at what we did. Each of us has a name which goes unspoken by those without language, but they know who you are. Each of us has a name we dream of lasting longer than our carbon allows. It goes on a stone when we're gone. And I never do a reading without reading my weekly Torah portion poem. It's sort of a tradition. This week's text from today actually talks about all the things that you're not supposed to eat and that you're allowed to eat if you keep kosher. It responds to this line of text: these are the creatures that you may eat among all the animals on earth. And the poem is called The Laws of Creature Eaters. I remember what it was like to eat the creatures of the earth, the satisfaction of their protein, the feeling I was really eating something. 37 years later, I still complain if there's no tofurkey at Thanksgiving. A grown-up boy needs his meat, even if it's the faux kind. I wander through the restaurants of the world longing for a leaf icon next to a variety of choices indicating they had me in mind when they put their whole thing together. The uninitiated still tell me, I think they have salads, which only serves to make me weep. I just want to be a regular person in a world of creature eaters. The only time the text speaks to me on this is near the beginning when it says to not eat from the tree of knowledge. That didn't go well, and now we know too much. Rest safely, O creatures of the day and night, whether you have joints and hop or cloven feet or chew your cud. Whether you are forbidden or allowed, your flesh will never pass these lips. This is my promise. This is how I will observe these laws. Now I'm off to have a salad and weep. I've got two more little poems to read you. Both of these are not published, haven't been seen before, and they're from my book, which is coming out soon. It's Spritz O'Clock Somewhere, poems that I wrote in Italy last summer. This is one of the very first poems in the book. It's called The Gelato Department. I tell Addie she's in charge of gelato 2 weeks before we leave the American ground. I've been arranging all the other details, where we're going to sleep, what we're going to do between the times when we sleep, what we're going to put in our mouths. I just discovered you can search for Michelin star restaurants, and now I'm going to have to mortgage our house to eat the way I want to eat on this trip. But Addie's in charge of gelato, though she's not ready to think about it, as she has to leave town and then come back before we fly over North America and the Atlantic. I'm sure she's up to the task. She's the entire gelato department. And finally, this poem is called Not Ordinary, which I wrote. We ended our amazing trip in Italy in Paris with just one night in Paris, or maybe 2 nights, but one day in Paris. It wasn't really fair to Italy that we went to Paris afterwards. Italy was great, but we went anyway. And this poem towards the end of the book is called Not Ordinary. A tip in a guide says, another ordinary picture of the Eiffel Tower? Try something new. I wake up in Paris with that ordinary beauty staring at me through this French window. The way she pierces the sky and stands assuming above everything else created. In this land of cheese and beautiful streets. We will wander all of them today, our only day here, like it's the infusion we've needed for years to tide us over until the next time we are lucky enough to why not our way across the sea to this place. Monet, we are coming for you today. Seine, we will touch lips on your bridges. Notre Dame, our much needed checkup after your disaster is on the schedule. All of it in our ordinary eyes on one day. There are no ordinary pictures of the Eiffel Tower. There you go. Wait, I wanted to show one more slide for folks so they can see the covers of our books. There you go. Rick's book on the left, out now. Rick, maybe you can tell us how folks can get it in German at the moment if they'd like. Post a link in the chat or something. And Rick's book on the right, coming out soon. We're still proofreading it. My hope is to have 15% fewer typos than in previous books. And that one's going to be out soon.
Oh, thank you for the last slide, and for the poems. I like the first one because I'm surprised that I haven't asked you this yet, because I'm often asked if it's really Rick that is the name in my birth certificate, because it's an abbreviation. And so you are also really called Rick.
Swear to God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
What is it? An abbreviation from something else in German, or what's the full
No,
name?
it's an American. It's an English name, Richard.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So your parents were paying tribute to me.
Yes, I guess so. To you or to Rick Astley, I'm not sure.
I can't believe I've just been rickrolled on the on the Rick Lupert show, but I guess it was kind of inevitable that that was going to happen. I'll tell you this, Rick. I'm never going to give you up, as it were. You know this was going to happen. All right, well, we have one last segment. We don't really know how this is going to go. Let's just pretend that that was the formal end of the actual Rick Lupert event, all the stuff that we had planned where we kind of knew how it was going to go. And now we're going to actually open it up to questions from the audience, if there are any. Ask questions to Rick Lupert or Rick Lupert. Please specify if you have a question, whether you're asking a question to Rick Lupert or Rick Lupert, so that we know which person is should answer, or if we should answer simultaneously. So I guess if anyone has a question, you could post it in the chat, or you could unmute yourself and let us know your question.
Hey, Rick, this is your cousin Greg from New York. And I hello.
Thanks.
It's
for
been
being here.
wonderful, I will just say. And so great to meet another Rick Lupert. So I have following up on some genealogy questions. I have a couple of Rick Lupert Vienna questions. Number one, Rick Lupert in Vienna. How tall are you?
How tall am I?
Yes.
I don't know it in American whatever.
I have the translation
great,
here ready
great.
to go.
So 1 meter and 85 centimeters.
Okay.
1 meter and 85 centimeters.
Okay, so you are 6 feet tall, just slightly over 6 feet tall. So
Okay.
I
Good to
think,
know.
yeah, so I think that's gonna that doesn't bode well for the actual genealogy being anything physical there.
Yeah.
And then one more question for Rick in Vienna. Are you concerned that in 30 years your hair will look like Rick Lupert in California.
This
I
interview is over.
I don't know how to answer that question.
Next
I
question.
yeah,
I'm
great.
I'm done, but thank you very much. This has been outstanding.
Yeah,
I
nice to meet
thoroughly
you.
enjoyed myself.
Thank you, Greg and Mary. Nice to see you.
That
Catherine Vanderwerk, looks like you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
I look like I'm unmuted here.
Great.
Okay, so you can hear me. For Vienna, Rick Lupert, because your American counterpart is a poet and you write fiction, was there ever a time in your younger life when you considered writing poetry instead of fiction or as well as fiction?
I like to read poetry. I have tried to write it, and it's always really terrible. So I won't. Yeah, I'm not good at it, but I really enjoy reading it, and I think that makes things easier for the two of us. So you write poetry and I write prose, and that's the easiest way to distinguish us, apart from the continent, the language, and the other things.
And there's no competition.
Yeah. True.
Same question for U.S. Rick Lupert. Though you started writing poetry, was there fiction or nonfiction in your past, or was that a consideration? Or did you just say, okay, it's poetry and that was it?
I think I don't really write long form. I tried to write a novel once, but it was more in the spirit of a Richard Brautigan novel, or his novel Trout Fishing in America, which is more like a series of different essays that you might have to struggle to see why they're connected, as opposed to a long single narrative. I have a short attention span, and so in terms of my creative output, it tends to be shorter things. Which reminds me, Rick, when you were listing the differences between us, I just heard my wife in the other room say, "And the height." So she just wants to drive that point home. But yeah, no, I don't. I'm excited that there's another Rick Lupert out there, and I only think it can help both of our causes. But I'm pretty much sticking to poetry. That's my voice. I wrote an essay not too long ago about the state of Florida and how I had issues with what was happening down there that got picked up in Unlikely Stories online magazine. But that's like once every 20 years I might write a nonfiction piece like that. But that's about it.
Stick to poetry, you're at it.
Thank you. Karen Choi asks in the chat, besides Rick Lupert, who is your favorite author?
I think it's a question for both of us. So if you want to start.
Sure. Well, I have three people who are my favorites. One is Richard Brautigan, who I just mentioned, who was wrote kind of at the end of the beatnik period in the 70s and early 80s. He wrote poetry and novels. There's a lot of absurdity and humor and beauty in his work. He's at the top. And then I would probably divide it between my friend Brendan, who was here earlier, who's one of the best American or world poets who we have alive today. And always when he writes, you kind of learn what the very possibilities of poetry can be. and it's always very interesting and sometimes heart-wrenching and sometimes hilarious. And also, to some extent in that vein, Jeffrey McDaniel is another poet who I list as one of my favorite authors. What about you?
Yeah, I also have many different favorite authors, but because because there are so many Americans and you are American, I'll just say William Faulkner, who is unfortunately completely I mean, he's almost non-existent in German language, or in Germany or Austria. Nobody reads him, even though there are fine translations. But I discovered him, I don't know, when I was 17 or 18, and he's great. I love him. I read the first novel I read of him was The Worst Starting Entry Point, Epsilon Epsilon, which to make things worse and more difficult, I read in English. But I found it so fascinating and so so different from everything I had read before that I just kept on reading, even though I didn't understand a thing. And by now I have written a bachelor's thesis on Epsilon Epsilon, so it really stayed with me. He's an unbelievably good writer.
It's impressive to know that you're reading and connecting with work outside of your native tongue, which is something that, as we alluded to earlier, that Americans really struggle with. I know I do, just because that's just how our education system works. But so that's great. Great to hear that. I see Jeff Betker in the chat asks, are there any other known Addie Luperts in the world? I only know of one. Maybe you know of some, Rick. I can tell you that the world would be better if there were many more of them.
I don't know any Addie Lupert. My aunt is called Andrea Lupert, but that's at least an A.
We're getting there. We're getting there. Anyone else have any questions for Rick Lupert's? I guess that's it. Well, Rick, what a great joy and honor and privilege it was to be able to connect with you in this way at the first weekly Rick Lupert Summit that will forge a path forward for all Rick Luperts and the entire Rick Lupert civilization from here on. Thank you so much for spending this time with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for contacting me after I followed you. It was a great pleasure, and I hope to keep in touch, and maybe we can do this again. Maybe when your new book comes out or sometime. But very much fun. Thanks.
That sounds great. Yeah, I think it would be great to have an additional Rick Lupert at the Rick Lupert publication reading. It'll take the burden off me, I think, a little bit. I want to so thanks everyone for being here. I know we had a lot of people from America here in the afternoon, and I know we had some people from Eastern Europe where it's like 11:30 at night, I believe there. So thanks for staying up late, and really appreciate everyone being here. So round of applause to our attendees, our question answers, and to Rick Lupert.
Thank you.